I was halfway through making coffee when the phone rang, and the moment I heard her voice, my stomach tightened. My aunt never called me without a purpose. "Sweetheart," she said, stretching the word as if she were trying to wrap me in a blanket that I knew was full of barbed wire. "The will reading has been postponed. There are some changes." I nearly dropped the mug in my hand. Changes? My mother's will? She'd been dead for only 3 weeks, and I'd been clinging to that reading like a lifeline, the moment where at least some security would be confirmed in an otherwise free-falling life. I didn't say anything for a second, just listened to the faint hum on the other end of the line, the wet sip of her drink, the deliberate pause that told me she was savoring my shock. "What kind of changes?" I finally asked. "Oh, nothing you need to worry about yet," she said, with that patronizing lilt she used on children. "It's all formalities. We'll talk soon." The line clicked before I could demand an explanation. I stood there in my tiny kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee filling the air, and stared at the silent phone. Formalities? Lawyers don't postpone will readings for formalities. Her tone had been too careful, too practiced. Somewhere deep in my chest, a warning bell started ringing. It was the same sound my mind made when I caught my landlord glancing at his watch mid-conversation, or when an ex-boyfriend said, "Strange coincidence," with a little too much emphasis. It meant something was about to happen behind my back. I looked at the calendar pinned to the fridge. The will reading had been scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. I had been counting down to it every day since the funeral. Now that day was a blank question mark. I didn't know it yet, but what my aunt had just done on the phone was only the first domino, and I wasn't going to like where they fell. Shall I write the next chapter? The moment I hung up, I sat down on the couch and gripped the fabric so tight my knuckles whitened. Why would my aunt care so much about postponing the will reading? There was only one logical reason. Whatever was in there, she wanted to change. And the only thing of serious value my mother had left was the house. That house isn't just property. It's my entire history. The creak in the top stair that told me she was coming up with a cup of tea. The guest room she turned into a study when I was applying to colleges. The rose bushes she planted after my father left us for good. Every single brick was worked into the story of us. And beyond sentiment, it was survival. You see, my finances are fragile. When Mom's cancer came back, I moved in to care for her full time. That meant leaving my job, draining my savings, piling up credit card debt just to keep the lights on and the medications paid for. She knew this. She promised, more than once, that when the time came, the house would be mine. Not as a reward, as a safeguard. I'd even helped her meet with the lawyer to update her will 18 months ago. I remember sitting in that oak-paneled office, noting the way she smiled, telling him, "This house goes to my daughter. No questions, no delay." She also made some split arrangements for her liquid assets. A bit of savings split between me and my cousins. But the house was never negotiable. Now the same aunt who barely visited during Mom's chemo was apparently in a position to postpone the very event that should have put that promise in writing. How? Executors can't just make up delays without cause. And as far as I knew, my aunt wasn't even supposed to be the executor. I tried calling the lawyer's office that night. Closed. I left a message, each word shaking. But if I thought I could just wait for a return call, I was wrong. Because the next morning, when I went into my mother's room to look for the old will paperwork, I noticed something strange. Her jewelry box was gone, and this was only the first thing missing. Shall I write the next chapter? My first reaction was to think I'd misplaced it, the jewelry box. But no, it had sat in the same spot on top of her dresser for decades, like an altar. Dark cherry wood, with brass hinges dulled from years of her fingertips. Inside was everything she wore and everything she treasured but didn't. The gold bracelet my father gave her before their relationship shattered. The locket with baby photos of me tucked inside. Even the tacky little ceramic earrings she bought at a flea market on a whim. Now there was just an empty rectangle of dust where it used to be. The surrounding photos and books hadn't been touched, which meant whoever moved it knew exactly what they wanted. I searched the room again, going through drawers, her nightstand, even the small locked box she kept under the bed. That's when I noticed something else. One of the porcelain figurines from the mantel, her favorite, the ballerina with one chipped foot, was also gone. I called my aunt immediately. "Have you been in Mom's room?" I asked, skipping pleasantries. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed, so slowly it was almost a sigh. "Yes, I went by to collect a few keepsakes. I didn't want anything to happen to them." "Happen to them? They've been in the same place for years. What could happen?" I demanded. "It's just better this way," she said, her tone dipping into that syrupy condescension she'd perfected. "You're under a lot of stress right now, and I thought it might be safest in my care until everything's sorted." Safe in her care. Translation: already in her possession, possibly never to return. That night, lying awake, I scanned my memory for details. At the funeral, she darted in and out of rooms, telling anyone who questioned her that she was helping with the arrangements. At the time, grief had dulled my suspicion. But now I saw it differently. The furniture in this house wasn't just furniture. Most of it carried value, sentimental or actual. And I was starting to realize my aunt might be quietly clearing pieces out before the will locked anything in. And when I confronted her the next day about my suspicion, her reply made my blood boil. "Shall I write the next chapter?" When I told her point blank, "It looks like you're taking things that don't belong to you," she didn't even flinch. Instead, she let out a small laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they want to make you feel like a fool. "Oh, don't be so paranoid," she said smoothly. "You think I'm some kind of thief? Your mother and I talked about this before she passed. She didn't want you drowning in clutter and grief. She wanted me to help decide where some of her things should go." The way she slipped that line in, "help decide," sent a cold ripple through me. It sounded harmless on the surface, but I knew exactly what it was. A rewrite of reality. Mom had made no such request. Not to me, not in front of anyone else, not ever. "I was here nearly every day for the last 6 months," I said quietly. "If she wanted that, she would have told me." "That's what happens when you're too close," she replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You can't see the bigger picture. Besides, you've already benefited a lot from her generosity over the years." There it was, the first real jab, a veiled accusation, a reframing of my sacrifices as benefits. She was planting a seed, painting me as someone who'd already taken enough, so that any inheritance would look like greed. And she was good at it. Every word she chose was designed to make me look unstable, overly emotional, incapable of handling my mother's estate without her guidance. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking, but not from hurt. From fury. This wasn't just her being controlling. This was positioning. She was crafting a narrative for the rest of the family, and I knew where it was going. That suspicion became fact 2 nights later, when she brought up my taking too much in front of the whole family, and nothing could have prepared me for how she framed it. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened over Sunday dinner at my cousin Michael's house, the first time the whole extended family had gathered since the funeral. I wasn't even sure I wanted to go, but part of me thought it might ease some of the tension. Maybe we'd share good stories about Mom, maybe even laugh for a while. The table was crowded, every seat taken, the smell of roast chicken and rosemary filling the air. I was halfway through my first bite when my aunt, sitting directly across from me, put down her wine glass and said in that same slow, syrupy tone, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about fairness lately." Conversation at the table quieted, forks pausing midair. She turned her eyes on me, and I could feel everyone else's following like heat on the back of my neck. "It just seems," she continued, "that in the past few years, some of us have already benefited quite a bit from your mother's generosity. Loans that were never repaid, bills that somehow got taken care of." Her smile was thin and knowing. "And maybe, just maybe, when it comes time to divide what's left, things should reflect that." The words hit like a slap. I set down my fork, my appetite gone, my face burning. She was broadcasting to the entire family that I'd somehow siphoned money from my dying mother, twisting every act of care and sacrifice into a narrative of me as someone who'd taken advantage. "That's not true," I said, my voice steady but low. "I took care of Mom full time. Any money went to her treatments, not me." She leaned back, feigning innocence. "No one's accusing anyone. I'm just saying, fairness matters to all of us." It worked. I caught the subtle glances passing between my cousins, the small nods, seeds planted, just like she intended. I forced down the rest of the evening, excusing myself early, my body buzzing with humiliation and anger. The ride home felt like driving through fog, every streetlight stretching into long, blinding streaks. By the time I got back to my mother's house, I'd decided I needed to end this tension, to propose something sensible that could preserve both my future and the family peace. But when I sat down with my aunt to offer that compromise, her response was colder than I'd imagined. "Shall I write the next chapter?" I invited her over under the pretense of talking things through, hoping the neutral ground of my mother's living room might soften her. The house felt smaller with her in it, her perfume too strong, her gaze too sharp, scanning the shelves like she was inventorying them. I poured tea, set it between us, and took a steady breath. "Look," I began, "I understand there are different things in the will. I'm willing to compromise on some assets. The life insurance, the savings. We can split those however you think is fair. But the house..." My throat tightened. "The house is all I have left. I need to keep it. I'm not asking for anyone else to give up money. Just let me keep the home." For a flicker of a second, something in her face softened, but it vanished just as quickly. She leaned back and crossed her legs, assessing me like I was a stranger making a bad business pitch. "You don't get to make those decisions," she said flatly. "I'm the executor." That word, executor, landed like a gavel. My mother had never told me my aunt would have that role. My belief had always been that the lawyer handled things neutrally. "Since when?" I asked. "She appointed me last year, when you were distracted." The implication was clear. Distracted with caring for her, which apparently in my aunt's telling, made me unfit to also think about logistics. I tried to push back, to explain I wasn't bargaining out of greed, but necessity. But she cut me off with a single sentence that made my skin crawl. "The house might be worth more sold. That way, we all get what's fair. We, always we, never Mom." The conversation ended with her promising to let me know when the will reading was rescheduled. No handshake, no agreement, just her slipping out with the faintest smile, like she'd moved a chess piece I hadn't seen coming. That night, pacing through the darkened hallway, I knew I couldn't just wait for the reading anymore. I needed something concrete, proof of what Mom had actually wanted, in her own words. And 2 days later, Inside a locked desk drawer, I found it. Shall I write the next chapter? It was almost midnight when I decided to search Mom's old desk again. The heavy oak one in the corner of her study that she'd kept locked for as long as I could remember. I'd already found spare keys in her sewing basket, but until now, I hadn't had the nerve to use them. Maybe part of me was afraid I wouldn't like what I found. The lock turned with a reluctant click, and the drawer slid open with the dry scrape of wood. Inside were neatly stacked envelopes, bank statements, and folders labeled in Mom's tidy handwriting. It smelled faintly of her lavender lotion, and for a moment my chest ached so sharply I almost stopped. I went through the folders carefully, pushing aside tax records and handwritten recipes, until I spotted an envelope addressed to her lawyer. It was dated almost a full year ago, well after her last treatment had failed, at a point when she'd started making just-in-case arrangements. Hands trembling, I unfolded the letter. In her own words, precise, final, she had stated, "Under no circumstances is my home to be sold or divided. It is to go entirely to my daughter. This is my firm and unchanging wish." She had even underlined unchanging twice. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't vague. There was no room for twisting her meaning. If this was in the lawyer's possession, there would be no justification for changing a thing. But why, then, had the will reading been delayed? Why was my aunt so confident about selling the house? Unless this letter had never made it into the official file. A deep unease crawled up my spine. I needed more than just Mom's handwriting. I needed something that showed my aunt had known about her intent and ignored it. The answer came from an unexpected source. A quiet conversation I had later with one of Mom's hospice nurses. What she told me made my stomach turn. Shall I write the next chapter? I met the hospice nurse at the little coffee shop down the street from the care center. She was a small woman with tired eyes, but a kindness in her voice that made me trust her instantly. I'd called her earlier, asking if she might share anything about my mother's final days that could help me understand a few things. She'd hesitated before agreeing to meet. The moment we sat, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You need to know," she said quietly, leaning forward over her cup. "Your aunt visited your mom alone one afternoon, about 3 days before she passed. The door wasn't shut all the way, so I heard parts of their conversation while doing my rounds." My chest tightened. What did she say? Her eyes were steady. She was pressing her, asking if she was sure about the will, telling her that people, she didn't say who, were concerned you were too emotional to handle everything, that maybe she should reconsider the house being left entirely to you. She kept repeating the word fairness. I could see it in my mind. My mother, weak but alert, listening to her younger sister, trying to nudge her into amending the one thing she was certain about. "Did Mom agree to anything?" The nurse shook her head. She told her flatly, "My daughter gets the house, that's final." But I could tell your aunt didn't like that answer. She left, upset. My stomach churned. It was one thing to suspect my aunt of quietly taking keepsakes or twisting stories, but hearing that she'd actively tried to manipulate my mother on her deathbed was another level. And now, with the reading delayed and her suddenly claiming to be executor, it was obvious. She'd been maneuvering for this for months. I held the nurse's words in my head like a loaded weapon the whole way home. Between her testimony and the letter, I suddenly had something I hadn't before. Leverage. The question was, could I use it in time? The next will hearing had been set for the following Tuesday, and this time, I'd be walking in ready to burn it all down. Shall I write the next chapter? The morning of the will reading felt nothing like I'd pictured it all those weeks ago. I didn't wake up nervous or hopeful. I woke up electric, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and focus. I packed the letter in a clear plastic folder so the paper wouldn't crease, and I tucked my phone into my bag with the hospice nurse's recorded statement. She'd agreed, after some convincing, to let me capture her account. The lawyer's office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind with heavy glass doors that keep the cold air trapped in your bones. I got there early and sat in the hallway just outside the oak-paneled meeting room, pacing through the plan in my head. There was no way I could predict exactly how my aunt would react. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't let her speak over me this time. She strutted in 10 minutes late, wearing an expensive coat I'd never seen before. Maybe one of her keepsakes. She gave me a tight smile without slowing her stride, heading straight into the lawyer's office like she owned the air inside it. The will reading began politely enough. The lawyer, a white-haired man with an impeccably neat desk, shuffled through the official documents, clearing his throat before speaking. My aunt kept glancing at me with that smug little tilt of her head, as if she already knew the story that was about to be told, and loved the ending. When the lawyer reached the part about the property, my aunt leaned forward, but before he could continue, I slid the letter onto the desk, face up. "Before you say anything, I think you should see this," I said, my voice steady but loud enough to fill the room. His eyebrows furrowed as he read. Then I pressed play on my phone, letting the nurse's voice spill into the quiet. "My daughter gets the house. That's final." My aunt's face shifted in slow motion, the confidence draining like color from her cheeks. "That's hearsay," she snapped. "The letter isn't," the lawyer replied, voice firm. In that instant, I knew the ground had shifted. Whether I'd win today or not, her grip on the narrative was slipping, and everyone in the room could feel it. But what happened next wasn't just a win. It was a complete reversal. Shall I write the next chapter? The silence after the lawyer's words felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the drop. My aunt kept her eyes on him, refusing to look at me, as if pretending I wasn't there could undo the evidence sitting on his desk. He adjusted his glasses and pulled a separate folder toward him. "I should make this clear," he said slowly, deliberately. "There were requests placed recently to file an amendment to your mother's will. However," he tapped the folder, "the document was never signed, and without your mother's signature or notarization, it holds no legal weight." The words hit my aunt like bricks. "That's ridiculous," she blurted. "We had an agreement." "You attempted to alter the will without the testator's final signature," he interrupted sharply. "Furthermore, your appointment as executor was in the proposed amendment, not in the legal binding document. As of today, you are not the executor of this estate." The room felt suddenly brighter, like someone had opened a window. My aunt's mouth hung open in stunned silence. My cousins, who'd come along for support, exchanged awkward glances. It was dawning on them that all her months of quiet campaigning, planting doubts, insinuating greed, had been built on a lie she couldn't cash in. I sat back in my chair, the letter safely in front of the lawyer now. "So we'll proceed with the will as written?" I asked. "We will," he confirmed. "The property passes entirely to you." The air went heavy again as my aunt pushed back her chair abruptly. Without a word to me, she slid her bag onto her shoulder and walked out, her heels clicking like gunshots in the hallway. It was over in the legal sense, but I knew the fallout in the family was just beginning, and I was about to find out exactly what that would cost me. Shall I write the next chapter? The news traveled through the family like wildfire, and not in my favor. By the end of that week, my phone had more unread messages than I'd ever seen in my life. Some were coldly polite. "I hope you're not holding on to bitterness." Others were barbed daggers disguised as concern. "A lot of people think you should have shared more. Was it really what your mother wanted?" It was clear my aunt had wasted no time spinning the ending to suit her. In her version, She was the concerned sister just trying to keep the family united, and I was the selfish daughter clutching everything for myself. At the grocery store, I ran into my cousin Ruth, normally warm, always ready for a chat. That morning, she gave me a tight smile and mumbled a hello before wheeling her cart in the opposite direction. Socially, it was a slow freeze-out. Invitations to family dinners stopped. The group chat that used to ping almost daily with silly memes went silent for me. My aunt's car still parked occasionally on the street. Not in front of my house, just far enough that I knew she wanted me to see it. A quiet reminder. She was still around, still watching. The financial side wasn't easier. Legal fees for challenging her executor claim drained what little I had left, even though I'd technically won. While the house was now legally mine, maintaining it was another battle. Repairs Mom had put off were now my responsibility alone. One rainy night, staring out the window at the slick, glistening driveway, I wondered if the fight had been worth it. I'd gotten the house, yes, but at the cost of almost every family bond I'd had left. And yet, a few weeks later, something happened that stripped away the last of any lingering doubt I had about my choice, and finally let me breathe again. Shall I write the final chapter?